The metallic taste in my mouth wouldn't go away as I watched my family huddled in the corner of the hospital room, whispering urgently. My mother's fingers nervously twisted her necklace while my brother Drake scrolled through his phone, seemingly bored. My father stood with his back to me, gesturing emphatically to the doctor. "She's delusional," he insisted, voice low but clear in the quiet room. "She's been making these accusations for months." We're at our wits' end. The doctor nodded sympathetically, jotting notes on her clipboard, neither of them realizing I was awake and hearing everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eliza. I'm 26 years old and a journalist by profession. This is the story of how I discovered my own family was slowly killing me while convincing everyone, including myself for a time, that I was mentally ill. 6 months ago, I had everything going for me. I'd recently been promoted to senior reporter at the Metro Chronicle, covering investigative pieces that had started to gain national attention. My exposé on pharmaceutical price gouging had been picked up by major networks, and I was finally making a name for myself in the industry I'd worked so hard to break into. The symptoms started subtly. Occasional headaches that grew increasingly severe. Unexplained nausea that would hit after family dinners. Dizziness that would come out of nowhere, sometimes leaving me unable to stand. At first, I chalked it up to stress. The pressure of my new position, the longer hours, the high-stakes stories I was chasing, it made sense that my body was rebelling. My parents suggested I move back home temporarily. "Just until you get back on your feet," my mother said, concern etched across her face. "You're pushing yourself too hard, sweetheart. Let us take care of you for a while." It seemed like a reasonable solution. My apartment lease was ending anyway, and my childhood home was closer to the Chronicle's offices than my current place. Looking back, I should have recognized the red flags. The way my brother Drake suddenly became interested in preparing my meals. "I've been taking cooking classes," he explained with an uncharacteristic smile. "You can be my guinea pig." The way my mother insisted on making me special tea each night to help with the stress. The way my father started managing my medication, carefully doling out my prescribed migraine pills and vitamins each morning and evening. But I didn't see it then. I was too busy fighting the increasingly debilitating symptoms that plagued me day and night. The brain fog that made writing nearly impossible. The tremors in my hands that had my editor pulling me aside with concern. "Maybe you should take some time off," she suggested gently. "Your health comes first, Eliza." The breaking point came during a family dinner celebrating my father's promotion. I'd barely touched my food, my stomach already churning at the mere thought of eating. My mother had prepared my plate specially, claiming the bland foods would be easier on my system. Halfway through the meal, the room began to spin violently. My vision tunneled, voices around me distorting into unintelligible echoes. "She's having another episode," I heard my father say as I slumped in my chair. Through the haze, I saw my brother exchange a look with my mother. Not of concern, but something else. Something that sent ice through my veins despite the fever burning my skin. When I regained consciousness, I was in the hospital. Not for the first time in recent months, but this time was different. A new doctor stood at my bedside, one I didn't recognize from previous visits. Dr. Miranda Chen, neurologist, according to her name badge. "Your family tells me you've been experiencing some psychiatric symptoms, along with the physical ones," she said, studying me with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Paranoia specifically. They're quite concerned." "Paranoia?" My voice sounded strange even to my own ears, weak and raspy. Dr. Chen nodded, glancing at her notes. "They say you've accused them of tampering with your food and medication, that you believe they're trying to make you sick." The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were gaslighting me, creating a narrative that I was mentally unstable, planting seeds of doubt with every new doctor I saw. And it was working. 3 different physicians had already suggested psychiatric evaluations, antipsychotics, therapy for, quote, delusional thinking. "I'm not paranoid," I whispered, even as doubt crept in. Was I? Had stress and illness twisted my perception? The symptoms were real, but their cause? Had I invented a villain where there was none? Dr. Chen didn't immediately dismiss me as others had. Instead, she asked, "When did these symptoms start exactly? And did they coincide with any changes in your life?" I told her everything. The promotion, the move back home, the gradual escalation of symptoms that always seemed worse after meals prepared by my family. The way my mother insisted on washing my clothes separately from everyone else's. How my prescribed medications sometimes looked slightly different than they had at the pharmacy. Subtle differences in color or shape that pharmacists assured me were just manufacturing variations when I called to check. Throughout my explanation, Dr. Chen remained expressionless, taking detailed notes. When I finished, she said simply, "I'd like to run some tests that haven't been done yet." "More tests? I've had dozens." "Not these ones," she replied, something in her tone making me pay closer attention. "And I'd prefer if your family wasn't informed of the specific panels I'm ordering. Hope, dangerous, fragile, flickered to life. You believe me?" Dr. Chen chose her words carefully. "I believe in ruling out all possible medical explanations before considering psychiatric ones. And there are some tests that haven't been performed that should have been, given your symptom profile." While a nurse drew multiple vials of blood, Dr. Chen asked more questions. Had I recently changed my diet? Started new medications? Moved into a newly renovated space? Used new cleaning products? Her questions were precise, methodical, leaving no stone unturned. "We'll have preliminary results by tomorrow," she assured me. "In the meantime, I've ordered that all food and drink you receive come directly from hospital services. No outside items, even from family." I've cited potential allergic reactions as the reason. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without nightmares. The next afternoon, Dr. Chen returned. Another doctor in tow whom she introduced as Dr. Patel, a toxicologist. My family had gone to the cafeteria, giving us a rare moment of privacy. "We found something," Dr. Chen said without preamble. "Significant levels of arsenic in your system, along with traces of other heavy metals that shouldn't be there." The room seemed to tilt. "Arsenic? Like poison?" Dr. Patel nodded grimly. "The levels suggest chronic exposure over months, not a single incident." "This isn't accidental, Miss Carter." "My family," I whispered, the confirmation of my worst fears both vindicating and devastating. "But why? It doesn't make sense." "That's for the police to determine," Dr. Chen replied. "We've already contacted them, as we're legally required to do when we suspect intentional poisoning." Everything moved quickly after that. Detectives interviewed me extensively, taking samples of my hair and nails, which would show a timeline of the poisoning. Hospital security was stationed outside my room, with strict orders about who could enter. My phone and personal items were collected as evidence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The detectives asked if I had somewhere safe to store evidence. Remembering my journalistic instincts despite months of brain fog, I told them about the encrypted cloud storage where I kept sensitive information for articles. "I started keeping a journal of my symptoms about 3 months ago," I explained. "And I have photos of my medications before and after my parents handled them. The differences are subtle, but they're there." The lead detective, a woman named Esposito with tired eyes and a determined set to her jaw, seemed impressed. "Your documentation will be invaluable. Most victims in your situation don't have that kind of evidence." "Most victims?" The idea that this was common enough to have a profile chilled me. "Poisoning is more common than people realize," she confirmed. "Especially when there's something to gain." "But there's nothing to gain from making me sick," I protested. "My family isn't hurting for money. I don't have a massive insurance policy. It doesn't make sense." Detective Esposito's expression told me she had theories, but she kept them to herself. "We'll figure out the motive," For now, focus on getting better. Treatment began immediately, chelation therapy to remove the heavy metals from my system. The process was grueling, leaving me exhausted and nauseous. But with each passing day, my mind grew clearer. The brain fog lifted incrementally, and with it, memories began to surface. Conversations I'd overheard but hadn't processed. Strange behaviors I'd dismissed or rationalized. My brother Drake checking my computer when he thought I was asleep. My mother carefully collecting my hair from brushes. My father insisting on handling my medications. Individual incidents that seemed innocuous at the time now formed a damning pattern. 1 week into my hospital stay, Detective Esposito returned, her partner, Detective Rivera, at her side. Their expressions told me they had news. "We executed a search warrant on your parents' home yesterday," Esposito began without preamble. "We found arsenic compounds hidden in your father's workshop, along with various other substances consistent with what we found in your system. We also found documents on your brother's laptop," Rivera added. "He'd been researching your investigative pieces, particularly the pharmaceutical series." My mind raced, struggling to connect the dots. "My articles? What do they have to do with this?" The detectives exchanged glances. "Your last major investigation before you got sick. Who was it about?" "Nexichem Pharmaceuticals," I replied automatically. "They've been manipulating clinical trial data and hiding negative side effects of their flagship diabetes medication. People have died. I was close to publishing the full story when I got sick. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Wait, you think there's a connection?" Esposito nodded grimly. "Your brother Drake has been employed by a subsidiary of Nexichem for the past 2 years. A fact he apparently never mentioned to you. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. And my parents? Your father's investment portfolio includes significant holdings in Nexichem stock," Rivera explained. "Millions of dollars worth. If your story broke, those shares would likely become worthless overnight." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. My own family had systematically poisoned me, their daughter, their sister, to protect their financial interests, to silence a story that would cost them money. They'd gaslighted me, convinced doctors I was mentally ill, nearly killed me, all for profit. "We've taken them into custody," Esposito continued. "They're being charged with attempted murder, among other things. Your brother is cooperating, claiming your parents were the masterminds, but his digital footprint suggests he was actively involved in researching the poisons used." I should have felt something: relief, anger, grief. Instead, I felt oddly hollow, as if watching someone else's tragedy unfold. "What happens now?" "You focus on healing," Rivera said kindly. "And when you're strong enough, we'll need your formal statement. The district attorney is building a case, and it's solid. Your documentation, the physical evidence, their financial motive, they won't get away with this." That night, alone in my hospital room with the security guard still posted outside, I cried for the first time since learning the truth. Not for my family. I couldn't bring myself to mourn people capable of such calculated cruelty, but for the trust that had been irrevocably shattered. The naive belief that blood meant loyalty, that family was the one place in the world where you were always safe. As the chelation therapy continued, my strength gradually returned. My editor visited, bringing flowers and fierce determination. "Your job is waiting when you're ready," she promised. "And that Nexichem story, we'll publish it when you're back. They don't get to silence you." Friends I hadn't seen in months. Friends my family had gradually isolated me from with their talk of my mental fragility came in waves once the news broke. They brought food I could trust, books to distract me, and unwavering support that helped stitch together some of what had been broken inside me. Dr. Chen continued to oversee my treatment, her initial clinical detachment warming to cautious friendship. "Medical literature on intentional poisoning is surprisingly limited," she admitted during one checkup. "Your case, with your permission of course, could help other doctors recognize the signs earlier." The idea that my suffering might protect others gave me the first sense of purpose I'd felt in months. "I'd like that," I told her. "And when I'm stronger, I want to write about it too. Not just the medical aspects, but the psychology of it. How families turn on their own. How easy it is to make someone doubt their own reality. 2 weeks after my family's arrest, Detective Esposito brought news that cracked my newfound composure. "We found journals in your mother's closet," she said gently. "Detailed records of what they were giving you, observations of your symptoms. They've been doing this for longer than we initially thought. Small doses, building up gradually." "How long?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Based on her notes, almost a year. "Well before you moved back home. They would add small amounts when you visited for dinner, monitoring how you reacted." A year. They'd been poisoning me for a year. The timeline realigned in my mind. The stress migraines that had started during my initial research into Nexichem. The stomach flu that had sidelined me for a week when I'd been scheduled to interview a whistleblower. The exhaustion that had delayed my follow-up investigation. None of it had been coincidence. "There's something else," Esposito continued hesitantly. "Your mother's journals mentioned another journalist who was looking into Nexichem, someone named Marcus Winters. Do you know him?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus had been my mentor when I first started at the Chronicle. He'd suffered a mysterious illness 2 years earlier, eventually taking medical retirement. Doctors had never pinpointed the cause of his neurological symptoms. "We're reopening the investigation into his case," Esposito said, watching my face carefully. "If your family did this to him too." "They knew him," I whispered. "He came to dinner at my parents' house a few times when I first started working with him. He always praised their cooking." The implications were staggering. How long had this been going on? How many others had they silenced? And how deep did the Nexichem connection truly go? As my physical strength returned, so did my investigative instincts. With my editor's blessing and resources from the Chronicle, I began building a new story, not just about Nexichem's pharmaceutical fraud, but about the lengths corporations would go to silence those who threatened their profits. About families who valued money over morality. About the systematic poisoning of truth-tellers. 3 months after Dr. Chen had confirmed what I'd feared, I was released from the hospital. The chelation therapy had removed most of the heavy metals from my system, though some effects might be permanent. Occasional tremors in my hands, a heightened sensitivity to certain foods, nightmares that might never fully fade. My parents and brother remained in custody, denied bail due to the severity of the charges and the calculated nature of their crimes. Their trial was months away, but prosecutors were confident. The evidence was overwhelming. I moved into a new apartment in a secure building, my address unlisted, my habits carefully guarded. Trust didn't come easily anymore, but I was learning to extend it in measured doses to those who had earned it. Drive. Chen, Detective Esposito, my editor. The friends who had refused to be driven away. The first day back at my desk at the Chronicle, I opened a new document and typed a title. Poisoned Truth: How Corporations and Complicit Families Silence Whistleblowers. Below it, I began to write my own story, alongside Marcus's, and others we had discovered since. A pattern of suspicious illnesses, afflicting journalists and researchers who had dared to challenge powerful interests. It would be the most important story I'd ever tell. Not just for justice or for closure, but for all those who might come after me. Those who noticed the metallic taste in their food, the unexplained symptoms, the gaslighting that made them doubt their own perceptions. For them, I would transform my tragedy into a warning, my suffering into a shield. Because that's the thing about poisoners. They count on silence, on shame, on victims too confused or too dead to tell their stories. But I had survived, and my voice was stronger than ever. They had tried to silence me, but instead they'd given me the story of a lifetime. And this time, nothing would stop me from telling it. The trial preparations consumed my life in the months that followed. Each day brought new revelations as prosecutors built their case against my family. Evidence that should have horrified me now only confirmed what I already knew. They had methodically, deliberately poisoned me to protect their financial interests. Detective Esposito called regularly with updates. The forensic accountants found offshore accounts. She told me during one such call, "Your family's connection to Nexichem goes deeper than just investments. They were receiving direct payments. Consultation fees, officially, but the timing coincides perfectly with your investigation and subsequent illness." I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open to the draft of my article series, which had grown to over 30,000 words. So they weren't just protecting their investments, they were actively on Nexicem's payroll. It appears that way, she confirmed. Your brother's role seems particularly significant. As a chemist at the subsidiary, he had access to compounds that wouldn't raise flags if purchased. He knew exactly what to use and how to administer it to cause maximum damage without immediate detection. The betrayal should have cut deeper, but I'd grown numb to revelations about my family. Instead, I channeled everything into my work. The investigation had expanded well beyond Nexicem, uncovering a pattern of suspicious illnesses among journalists, researchers, and whistleblowers who had threatened corporate interests across multiple industries. Marcus Winters, my former mentor, had agreed to meet. His hands shook worse than mine as he sat across from me at a quiet cafe, chosen for its corner tables and distance from windows. Paranoia was our new normal. I never connected the dots, he admitted, voice rough from the permanent damage to his nervous system. By the time I realized something was wrong, the damage was done. Doctors called it an autoimmune disorder of unknown origin. I accepted it. Did you ever suspect my family? I asked, the question that had haunted me since learning of his case. Marcus stared into his untouched tea. I had dinner at your parents' house 3 times while mentoring you. Each time I was violently ill afterward. But I never, he shook his head. They were so kind, so concerned. Your mother even called to check on me the next day. I thought it was food poisoning, maybe an allergy. The thought that it was deliberate never crossed my mind. The calculated nature of it all made my skin crawl. The follow-up calls, the concerned messages, all part of their cover, all while they slowly destroyed lives to protect corporate secrets. My editor had assigned a team to work with me on the expanded investigation: researchers, fact-checkers, legal consultants. The Chronicle was taking no chances with a story this explosive. Nexicem's legal department had already sent threatening letters, which our attorneys had countered with evidence packets so damning the company had gone conspicuously silent. They're in damage control mode, my editor explained during our daily briefing. Their stock dropped 15% just on the news that we're investigating. When the full story breaks, they'll likely face criminal charges, not just civil suits. I should have felt vindication, but mostly I felt tired. The lingering effects of the poisoning combined with the emotional toll of the past months left me exhausted in a way sleep couldn't cure. Dr. Chen had warned me recovery would be measured in years, not months. Chronic heavy metal poisoning changes the body's fundamental systems, she'd explained during my latest checkup. Your nervous system, your digestive tract, your cognitive functions, they've all sustained damage. Some effects may be permanent. Others will improve with time and treatment. I'd nodded, already aware of my new limitations. The tremors that made typing difficult some days, the sudden memory lapses that left me grasping for words mid-sentence, the digestive issues that restricted my diet to bland, simple foods. But I'm alive, I'd replied, and I can still write. That's what matters. And write I did, pouring everything into documenting not just what had happened to me, but the larger pattern it represented. The silencing of truth through calculated harm, the corporate machinery that made such silencing profitable, the complicity of ordinary people, like my family, who valued money over morality. During the pre-trial hearings, I saw my family for the first time since learning the truth. They sat together on the defendant's side, dressed impeccably in courtroom-appropriate attire that couldn't hide what I now saw clearly: the coldness in my mother's eyes, the calculated stillness of my father's posture, my brother's nervous finger-tapping that spoke of impatience rather than remorse. They didn't look like monsters. That was perhaps the most terrifying realization. They looked like the family that had raised me, had celebrated birthdays and graduations, had seemed to take pride in my accomplishments. Had it all been performance? Had there ever been genuine love? Or had I simply been a prop in their carefully constructed life? My father caught my eye across the courtroom and had the audacity to offer a small, sad smile, as if we shared some private grief over an unfortunate misunderstanding. I held his gaze until he looked away, the first to break. The district attorney had prepared me thoroughly for my testimony, but nothing could have readied me for sitting on the witness stand. swearing to tell the truth about my own family's attempt to kill me. My voice remained steady as I recounted the progression of symptoms, the gaslighting, the isolation. "And did you confront your family with your suspicions?" the prosecutor asked. "Once," I testified. "About 4 months into the poisoning before I understood what was happening. I told them I thought something in the house was making me sick. The water, maybe, or mold. I suggested environmental testing. How did they respond? My mother cried, said I was accusing them of not keeping a clean home. My father suggested I see a psychiatrist for my growing paranoia. My brother Drake offered to make me a special smoothie with supplements that would clear the toxins from my system. The bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. I drank it. I was hospitalized that night with acute liver distress." The jury's expressions hardened. Medical experts testified to the extensive damage done to my system, the calculated escalation of dosages evident in my hair samples. Financial experts traced the money from Nexachim to my family's accounts. Digital forensics revealed my brother's searches for untraceable poisons and mimicking mental illness symptoms. When my mother took the stand in her own defense, she wept beautifully, speaking of her concern for my mental health, how they'd only been trying to help me through a difficult time. "We never would have hurt our daughter," she insisted, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "We only wanted what was best for her." I might have believed her once. Now I watched her performance with detached fascination, recognizing the calculated pauses, the practiced tremor in her voice. The same techniques she'd used when lying to me throughout my life. My father claimed ignorance. He'd trusted his wife and son with my care, had no knowledge of any poisoning. My brother blamed our parents, claiming he'd been coerced into helping them. Each tried to minimize their own culpability while shifting blame to the others. Their united front had crumbled in the face of potential life sentences. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts for all 3 defendants. The judge, a stern woman with penetrating eyes, delivered sentences that reflected the premeditated nature of their crimes. 30 years for my mother, 25 for my father, 20 for my brother. "The court rarely sees crimes of such calculated cruelty," she stated during sentencing. "The systematic poisoning of a family member, the deliberate gaslighting, the coordination with corporate interests to silence legitimate journalism, these actions strike at the very foundation of trust and truth in our society. I felt nothing as they were led away. No closure, no vindication, not even anger anymore. Just a hollow space where family should have been, and the knowledge that justice, while necessary, couldn't restore what had been taken from me." The day after sentencing, the Chronicle published my series, Poisoned Truth, Corporate Silencing, and the Journalists Who Survived It. The 5-part investigation detailed not just my case, but 11 others we'd confirmed, journalists, researchers, and whistleblowers who had been systematically poisoned after threatening corporate interests. Some had survived, like Marcus and me. Others hadn't been so fortunate. We'd worked with their families to tell their stories, to transform their deaths from medical mysteries into exposed crimes. For 3 of these cases, our investigation had prompted police to reopen investigations that had been closed as natural deaths or accidents. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Nexachem's stock collapsed entirely when trading opened the morning of publication. Federal agencies raided their headquarters and 3 manufacturing facilities. Class action lawsuits were filed on behalf of patients harmed by their medications. Former executives began turning on each other, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. But more importantly, our reporting sparked a national conversation about the lengths corporations would go to protect profits, and the vulnerability of those who dared to expose wrongdoing. Other news outlets picked up where we'd left off, investigating suspicious illnesses among environmental activists, consumer advocates, and regulatory whistleblowers. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I found myself adrift. The trial was over. The story was published. The singular focus that had carried me through the past year suddenly vanished, leaving me alone with the reality of my new life. A life without family, with permanent health limitations, and with trust issues that made even the simplest human connections challenging. Dr. Chen noticed my struggle during a follow-up appointment. "Have you considered trauma therapy?" she asked gently. The physical poisoning was only part of what was done to you. I'd been resistant to therapy, perhaps because my family had so often suggested it as a way to dismiss my legitimate concerns. But Dr. Chen had earned my trust in ways few others had. I wouldn't know where to start, I admitted. How do you process your entire family trying to kill you? How do you ever trust anyone again after that? You start by acknowledging that what happened wasn't your fault, she replied. And you rebuild trust gradually, with people who earn it through consistent actions, not just words. She referred me to Dr. Amara Singh, a therapist specializing in complex trauma and betrayal. Our first session was mostly silence on my part, distrust and defensiveness making it impossible to open up. But Dr. Singh was patient, meeting my skepticism with steady compassion. Trust is earned, she said toward the end of that first session. I don't expect you to trust me yet. I'll work to earn that trust, session by session. All I ask is that you keep showing up. And so I did, week after week, gradually finding words for the grief, the rage, the devastating loneliness of having your foundation shattered. Dr. Singh never rushed me, never minimized the magnitude of the betrayal I'd experienced, never suggested I should move on or find closure, when those concepts seemed laughably inadequate for what I was processing. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected call from Detective Esposito. We found something during the continued investigation, she said, without preamble. Something you should know about. We met at a quiet park, away from offices or cafes, where we might be overheard. The detective handed me a sealed evidence bag containing what appeared to be journal pages. These were found in a storage unit rented under your brother's name, she explained. They appear to be notes about previous attempts. My blood ran cold as I read through the pages. Clinical, detached observations about earlier poisoning attempts, not just against me, but against others. A columnist who had criticized Nexichem in a major newspaper. A researcher whose findings contradicted their clinical trials. A regulatory official who had questioned their approval application. How many? I asked, my voice barely audible. We've confirmed 5 deaths directly attributable to your family's actions on behalf of Nexichem, Esposito replied grimly. We suspect there may be more. The investigation is ongoing. The pages trembled in my hands. They were serial killers. I whispered, the realization both horrifying and clarifying. Corporate hitmen disguised as a normal suburban family. Esposito nodded solemnly. The prosecutor is preparing additional charges. They'll never see the outside of a prison again. I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt an odd sense of relief. This new information somehow made their betrayal more comprehensible, not less horrific, but less personal. They hadn't turned on me specifically. Their moral bankruptcy extended far beyond our family. I had been just another target in a pattern that predated my investigation. There's something else, Esposito added, hesitation evident in her voice. Your maternal grandmother's death 15 years ago, the one attributed to stroke? We're looking into that as well. Your mother was the sole beneficiary of a substantial insurance policy. The implications stole my breath. How far back did this go? How long had they been killers masquerading as an ordinary family? Had any of my childhood been real? Or had I been raised by monsters wearing convincing human masks? I brought these questions to my next therapy session, the horror of these new revelations threatening to overwhelm me. Dr. Singh listened attentively before offering a perspective I hadn't considered. You're searching for the point where they changed, she observed. The moment good people turned evil. But what if that's not what happened? What if they were always who they are, and the person who changed was you? What do you mean? You grew up, you developed your own moral compass. You became a journalist who sought truth even when it was inconvenient or dangerous. You changed, Eliza. You evolved into someone who could see through their facade, because you became fundamentally different from them. Her words resonated with memories I'd been avoiding, subtle warnings I'd dismissed throughout childhood. My mother's casual cruelty toward service workers. My father's boasts about business competitors he'd ruined. My brother's experiments on neighborhood pets that had been explained away as scientific curiosity. The signs had always been there. I simply hadn't had the context or maturity to recognize them for what they were. This realization, while painful, offered a strange kind of liberation. My family's monstrosity wasn't my failure to detect or prevent. It had preceded me, had existed independently of me. I had been a witness and ultimately a victim, but never a cause. A year after the publication of Poisoned Truth, I received the Pulitzer Prize for Investigative Reporting. Standing at the podium, still occasionally steadying myself against the podium when tremors threatened my balance, I looked out at the audience of journalists and thought about legacy. This investigation cost me my family, I began, my voice steady despite the weight of the words. But it gave me something more valuable: the truth. Not just about corporate malfeasance or the specific crimes committed against me and others, but the deeper truth that seeking justice is worth any personal cost. I spoke about the 11 other victims we'd identified, the investigations that had been reopened, the regulatory reforms that were being implemented as a direct result of our reporting. I acknowledged the team at the Chronicle who had supported me through the darkest days of both my physical recovery and the grueling investigation. Poisoners count on silence, I concluded, on shame, on victims too confused or too ill or too dead to tell their stories. But as journalists, breaking silence is our calling. Giving voice to those who have been silenced is our purpose. And no matter the personal cost, that purpose remains sacred. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for me, I knew. It was for every journalist who had risked everything to expose wrongdoing. For every whistleblower who had spoken truth despite the consequences. For every victim who had survived to tell their story. As I returned to my seat, Dr. Chen, who had become a close friend and had accompanied me to the ceremony, squeezed my hand. "You've turned poison into purpose," she whispered. "That's the greatest victory of all." And she was right. My family had tried to silence me, to erase me, to bury both me and the truth I sought to expose. Instead, they had created their own nemesis, a survivor with an unshakable commitment to exposing the systems that enabled their crimes. The healing wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be. The physical effects of the poisoning would likely follow me for life. The psychological trauma had altered how I moved through the world, how I formed relationships, how I assessed risk and trust. But I was alive. I was writing. I was speaking truth to power. And in that, I had found not just purpose, but a new kind of family, one built on shared values and earned trust, rather than blood and obligation. My investigation had expanded into a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting journalists facing threats and retaliation. We provided medical testing for those experiencing unexplained symptoms, legal resources for those facing intimidation, and secure housing for those in immediate danger. The work was ongoing, the need seemingly endless, but each journalist we helped, each story that made it to publication despite attempts to suppress it, represented a victory against the forces that had nearly claimed my life. Some days, the lingering effects of the poisoning made even basic tasks challenging. On those days, I remembered what Dr. Singh had told me during a particularly difficult therapy session. Survival itself is an act of defiance against those who wanted you silenced. On the days when you can't do more than survive, know that survival alone is enough. But most days, I could do more than merely survive. I could continue investigating, continue exposing, continue transforming my personal tragedy into systemic change. I could use my voice not just to tell my own story, but to amplify the voices of others who had been silenced. That, I had come to believe, was the most powerful response to those who had tried to poison my truth. Not just to survive their attempt, but to emerge from it with a louder voice, a clearer purpose, and an unshakable commitment to ensuring that truth, however bitter, would always find its way to light. 2 years after the publication of Poisoned Truth, I found myself standing in front of a classroom of journalism students at Columbia University. Their eager faces reminded me of my own early days in the profession. The idealism, the burning desire to uncover truth, the naive belief that good reporting alone could change the world. The most dangerous stories aren't the ones that make powerful people angry, I told them, my voice stronger now than it had been in years. They're the ones that make powerful people afraid. When your reporting threatens not just reputation but freedom, not just quarterly profits but entire business models, That's when you discover what you're truly up against. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Weren't you afraid? After everything that happened to you? The question deserved honesty. I'm still afraid, I admitted. But fear and courage aren't opposites. They coexist. The goal isn't fearlessness. It's finding purpose greater than your fear. After class, a student lingered, clutching a dog-eared copy of the book that had grown from my original investigation. My cousin was a whistleblower at a pharmaceutical company. She said quietly. She died of unexplained organ failure 3 weeks after submitting evidence to regulators. The family always suspected, but we could never prove anything. I'd heard variations of this story dozens of times since going public with mine. Each one reinforced what the data had already told us. What had happened to me wasn't an anomaly. It was simply one of the few cases where the perpetrators had been caught and held accountable. I'd like to look into your cousin's case, I told her, passing her my card, not from the Chronicle, but from the Transparency Project, the nonprofit I'd founded to investigate suspicious deaths and illnesses among journalists, whistleblowers, and activists. The project had started small. Just me, Detective Esposito, who had taken early retirement to join my team, and Dr. Chen, who consulted on medical aspects while maintaining her hospital practice. In 2 years, we'd grown to a staff of 15, including investigative journalists, forensic accountants, toxicologists, and digital security experts. We operated on a simple premise. When someone who threatened powerful interests died unexpectedly or developed unexplained illnesses, we investigated thoroughly, applying the lessons learned from my case and others to detect patterns that might otherwise be dismissed as coincidence. Our funding came from a coalition of journalism organizations, civil liberties groups, and a substantial portion of the settlement I'd received from Nexichem, money that felt like blood money, until I found a way to use it against the very systems that had authorized my poisoning. The work was demanding, often heartbreaking, but vital. For every case we investigated, we developed better protocols, more sensitive testing methods, stronger preventative measures for those at risk. We shared our findings with law enforcement, regulatory agencies, and most importantly, the public. My personal life had taken unexpected turns as well. Dr. Chen, Miranda, as I now called her, had become more than a physician and colleague. Our friendship had deepened gradually, cautiously on my part, given my lingering trust issues. But her consistent presence, her unwavering integrity, and her genuine care had slowly broken through my defenses. When she'd kissed me for the first time, after a late night reviewing toxicology reports, I'd been surprised, not by her actions but by my response, the absence of fear, the feeling of coming home to something safe and true. I'm damaged goods, I'd warned her, gesturing to my still occasionally trembling hands, the medication organizer that held the dozen pills I would likely take for the rest of my life to manage the lasting effects of the poisoning. Miranda had simply smiled. I'm a doctor, Eliza. I don't see damage. I see healing. I see strength. I see someone who survived the unsurvivable and transformed it into purpose. Our relationship progressed slowly, mindfully, Miranda understanding my need for absolute transparency, my panic at the thought of anyone preparing food for me, my nightmares that still woke me screaming some nights. She met each manifestation of my trauma with steady compassion, never pushing, never minimizing, simply being present as I continued to heal. The first time I let her cook for me was a milestone my therapist recognized as monumental. I'd sat at Miranda's kitchen counter, watching her prepare a simple pasta dish, fighting the anxiety that made my chest tight and my palms sweat. Talk me through what you're doing, I'd requested, my voice tight. Without judgment, she'd narrated each step, showing me ingredients before adding them, letting me watch the entire process. When she'd placed the plate before me, she'd taken a bite from it first, an accommodation she'd offered without my having to ask, understanding the trauma response that still made sharing food a profound act of trust for me. That night, as I managed a few careful bites, I'd cried, not from fear, but from the realization that I was reclaiming territory the poisoners had stolen from me. The simple human pleasure of sharing a meal, the intimate act of being nourished by someone who cared for me. Small victories, Miranda had said, squeezing my hand. Not small, I'd corrected. Revolutionary. Dr. Singh, my therapist, had helped me recognize these moments of healing for what they were, not just personal recovery, but acts of resistance against those who had tried to destroy me. They wanted to take your voice, your health, your trust, your future, she'd observed. Every time you reclaim a piece of what they tried to steal, you win. The legal aftermath of my case continued to unfold. New charges had been filed against my family, as more victims were identified. My testimony had been required for several of these cases, each court appearance an exercise in compartmentalization, speaking clinical truths about monstrous acts while maintaining the emotional distance necessary to function. I'd chosen not to attend the additional sentencing hearings. The new consecutive life terms added to their sentences were just numbers on paper, meaningless in practical terms. They would die in prison whether they served 1 life sentence or 10. More meaningful was the legislative impact of our continued reporting. Alexandra's Law, named for a young environmental activist who had died under suspicious circumstances after opposing a major pipeline project, established new protocols for investigating deaths of whistleblowers and journalists. The law mandated specific toxicology screenings, preservation of evidence, and involvement of federal authorities when the deceased had been involved in activities that threatened significant financial or political interests. It wasn't perfect, no law is, but it was a start, a recognition that what had happened to me and others reflected a systemic issue requiring systemic solutions. On the 2nd anniversary of the Transparency Project's founding, we held a memorial for the 27 confirmed victims we'd identified, journalists, whistleblowers, and activists who had died after being systematically poisoned for their work. Their families attended, many meeting for the first time, finding solace in the shared understanding that their loved ones hadn't died by accident or natural causes, but had been deliberately silenced. My sister wasn't crazy, the brother of one victim said during the ceremony, his voice breaking. She knew something was wrong, she tried to tell us, but we believed the doctors. The tests that showed nothing. We thought it was stress, mental illness, anything but what it actually was. Murder. His words echoed my own experience, the particular cruelty of gaslighting that accompanies poisoning. The way medical professionals become unwitting accomplices when they dismiss symptoms they can't immediately explain. The isolation of knowing something is terribly wrong, while everyone around you attributes it to stress, anxiety, or mental instability. The most effective silencing isn't just killing someone, I explained in my address to the gathered families. It's discrediting them first, making them doubt themselves, making others doubt them. By the time the poison takes their life, their voice has already been taken. After the ceremony, as families lingered, sharing stories and finding connection in their shared grief, a young reporter approached me. She introduced herself as Zoe Lambert from the Washington Post. "I'm working on something," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "Something big, corporate collusion with foreign intelligence services to target journalists. I have documents, sources, but," she hesitated, "things have been happening. Unexplained symptoms. Electronics malfunctioning. I think I'm being followed." I recognized the look in her eyes, the mixture of determination and fear, the second-guessing that comes with being targeted in ways designed to make you doubt your own perception. "Come to the project tomorrow," I told her. "Bring everything you have. We'll run a full toxicology panel, sweep your devices, assess your security situation." Her relief was palpable. "Everyone thinks I'm paranoid. My editor is supportive but skeptical. My family wants me to see a psychiatrist." "You're not paranoid," I assured her. "You're paying attention." That's different. The next day, our team confirmed what Zoe had suspected: trace amounts of a sophisticated neurotoxin in her system, surveillance software on her devices, and evidence of physical surveillance at her home and office. We immediately implemented our protection protocols: secure housing, medical intervention, digital security measures, and most importantly, acceleration of her investigation. "The best protection is publication," I explained to her as our team worked to secure her notes and sources. "Once the story is out, silencing you doesn't achieve anything. The information is already public. We worked around the clock to help Zoe complete her investigation, providing security and resources while she finalized her reporting. When the Washington Post published her explosive 5-part series on corporate intelligence collusion against journalists, complete with the documentation of her own poisoning, it created international shockwaves. Congressional hearings were called, regulatory investigations launched, foreign diplomats summoned. The corporations implicated saw stock prices plummet as investors fled the public relations disaster. More importantly, Zoe survived. Unlike so many before her, she had recognized the warning signs, sought help before the poisoning progressed to irreversible damage, and published her findings despite the attempts to silence her. At the project, we counted her case as a victory, not just for the impact of her reporting, but for what it represented: a breaking of the pattern. A journalist targeted for silencing, who had instead grown louder, whose work had created greater impact because of the attempts to suppress it. As our work continued, expanding internationally through partnerships with journalist protection organizations in countries where the risks were even greater, I found myself reflecting on transformation, how the worst experience of my life had become the foundation for my most meaningful work. During one of our regular leadership team meetings, our head of security, a former intelligence officer who had left government service after witnessing too many abuses of power, asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever miss your old life?" he inquired during a rare quiet moment. Before all of this happened. The normal career trajectory, family holidays, ordinary concerns. The question deserved careful consideration. "I miss the ignorance," I finally admitted. "The luxury of not knowing how deep the corruption goes, how vulnerable truth-tellers really are. But I don't miss who I was then, someone who hadn't yet been tested, who didn't understand what really matters." "And what does matter?" he pressed. "Using your voice while you have it, standing for truth, even when it costs you. Building communities of protection around those who speak inconvenient truths." I smiled slightly. "And proving that silencing tactics ultimately fail, that for every voice they try to extinguish, a dozen more will rise in its place." As the Transparency Project's 3rd anniversary approached, we prepared for our biggest initiative yet, the launch of a global early warning system for journalists and whistleblowers at risk. The system included secure communication channels, regular toxicology screening for those who had received threats, emergency extraction protocols, and rapid publication mechanisms for journalists whose lives were threatened. The night before the announcement, Miranda and I sat on the balcony of our apartment, looking out over the city lights. The evening was warm, the sky clear enough to see a few persistent stars despite the urban glow. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" she asked, her hand finding mine in comfortable familiarity. "Not nervous," I replied. "Ready." This is what all the pain was for. To create something that might have saved me if it had existed then. Something that might save others now. She nodded, understanding as she always did. "Your family never could have imagined this outcome when they tried to silence you. That their actions would create such a powerful force against everything they were trying to protect. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family's attempts to silence one journalist had instead created mechanisms to protect thousands. Their effort to prevent one story from being published had catalyzed an international movement for press freedom and corporate accountability. There's a lesson in that," I mused, about how efforts to suppress truth often amplify it instead. About how violence against journalists creates martyrs and movements, not silence. The project's global launch the next day exceeded our expectations. Journalist organizations from 60 countries joined our network. Major news outlets committed to implementing our safety protocols. Tech companies pledged resources for our secure communication platforms. Medical centers around the world agreed to provide the specialized testing we had developed. Standing at the podium, looking out at the international gathering of journalists, advocates, medical professionals, and security experts who had come together to protect those who risk everything for truth, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a fulfillment of purpose that gave meaning to all that had come before. When I was first poisoned, I told them I was alone, isolated. gaslighted by those I should have been able to trust, made to doubt my own perception of reality. That isolation is what makes poisoning so effective as a silencing tactic. But what we're building today is the antidote to isolation, a global community of protection, verification, and amplification. I gestured to the wall behind me, where photos of confirmed poisoning victims were displayed, those who had survived, like me and Marcus and Zoe, alongside those who had not lived to see their vindication. We honor these truth-tellers not just with memorials, but with action, not just with remembrance, but with revolution in how we protect those who speak truth to power. The poisoners bet on our silence, our shame, our disconnection from each other. Today, we show them how completely they have lost that bet. The standing ovation that followed wasn't for me. It was for the movement we had built together, for the transformative power of turning trauma into purpose, violation into vision. Later that evening, as journalists and advocates from around the world shared strategies and stories at the reception, I found myself standing slightly apart, watching the energy and commitment filling the room. Miranda joined me, slipping her arm through mine. "You've built something extraordinary," she said softly. "We've built it," I corrected. "All of us. Every survivor, every family member, every journalist who kept asking questions, every doctor who looked beyond the obvious, every security expert who shared knowledge instead of hoarding it." She smiled, acknowledging the truth of this. "Still, none of it would exist without you. Without your refusal to be silenced, your insistence on finding meaning in what was done to you." I thought about the long journey from that hospital room where I'd first awakened to the metallic taste of poison, hearing my family try to convince doctors I was mentally ill. The fear, the isolation, the physical agony, the betrayal beyond naming. Someone once told me that survival itself is an act of defiance. I reflected, but I've come to believe it's what we do with survival that matters most. The stories we tell, the systems we build, the communities we create. Around us, journalists from countries where telling truth meant risking everything shared resources with digital security experts. Medical professionals demonstrated the testing kits we'd developed for field use. Family members of those who had been silenced found purpose in protecting others from their loved ones. Fate. This was the true antidote to poisoning, not just the medical treatments that had saved my life, but the connections that had restored my sense of purpose. The transformation of private trauma into public action. The refusal to let silencing tactics achieve their ultimate goal. My family had tried to poison more than my body. They had tried to poison truth itself, to make the cost of speaking it too high for anyone to bear. In that, they had failed completely. The truth had emerged stronger, louder, more resilient, and now better protected. As I looked around at what we had built together, I knew with absolute certainty that while poisoners might claim individual victims, they would never silence the larger chorus of voices committed to truth. For every journalist silenced, a dozen more would rise to continue their work. For every whistleblower targeted, others would be inspired by their courage. This was the legacy I had chosen to create from the ashes of betrayal. Not just personal healing, but systemic change. Not just individual survival, but collective resistance. Not just one voice refusing to be silenced, but a global community ensuring that truth, however inconvenient, would always find its way to light. The metallic taste of poison had long since faded from my mouth, replaced by the sweeter flavor of purpose fulfilled. The tremors in my hands remained, but they held microphones now, wrote exposés, clasped the hands of other survivors. The damage done to my body had been transformed into strength of spirit that no poison could touch. In the end, that was the most powerful response to those who had tried to silence me, not just to survive their attempt, but to emerge from it with a voice that reached further, spoke louder, and changed more than they could ever have imagined possible when they first decided I was a threat that needed to be eliminated. The truth they had tried to poison had instead become an unstoppable force for accountability and justice, a legacy that would continue long after all of us were gone, protecting truth-tellers not yet born, who would carry forward the essential work of speaking truth to power, no matter the personal cost. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.